What if I told you that time stopped 5 minutes ago and you're only now noticing? What if every second you think is passing is actually the same second, repeated infinitely, and your mind is creating the illusion of movement through moments that don't move at all? The question seems absurd until you realize we've never actually seen time, only change, only motion, only the dance of things transforming. We trust clocks because they agree with each other, not because they show us time itself. But what if that trust is misplaced? What if time is not what we think it is? Tonight, we'll explore the impossible pause, not to find easy answers, but to discover that the very question reveals something profound about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the mystery of why anything exists rather than nothing at all. Right now, you feel time passing, but feeling is not the same as truth. You sense seconds flowing like water, minutes accumulating like heartbeats, hours dissolving into the past as surely as breath dissolves into air. This feeling is so fundamental to consciousness that questioning it seems absurd. Time flows, change happens. The universe moves from past to future in an orderly procession that makes sense of everything. But physics whispers a different story. In Einstein's equations, time is not a flowing river, but a dimension like space. Extended, explorable, equally real in all directions. The past still exists at its own coordinates in space-time. The future already exists at its coordinates. What we call now is not a moment moving through time, but a perspective, like standing on a mountain ridge and seeing both valleys at once. This block universe view suggests something unsettling. Time might not flow at all. The sensation of temporal passage might be an illusion created by the way consciousness processes information, the way memory stores the past but not the future, the way entropy creates an arrow pointing from order to disorder. Your brain has no master clock ticking away moments like a metronome. Instead, it has networks of neural oscillations, gamma waves at 40 Hz, alpha waves at 10 Hz, delta waves during sleep. These rhythms create the sense of temporal flow by integrating memories with present sensations and future anticipations into a seamless stream of experience. But the stream is constructed, not given. In moments of extreme focus or meditation, the sense of time's passage can slow, speed up, or disappear entirely. Athletes describe bullet time perception during peak performance. Meditators report experiencing timeless awareness, where hours feel like minutes or minutes feel like eternities. If time's flow is subjective, created by consciousness rather than existing independently, then asking, "What if time stopped?" reveals a deeper question. What if the thing you think is flowing was never flowing at all? Time is not a river you move along. You are the river. Consider this. Every photograph captures a moment that, according to physics, still exists. The light hitting the camera sensor is real. The arrangement of atoms is fixed in space-time coordinates. Yet you experience that photograph as a frozen slice of something that was moving. The movement was never in the moment itself. It was in your consciousness, threading moments together into the story of duration. What if time stopping would be indistinguishable from time continuing? What if the pause and the flow are the same phenomenon seen from different perspectives? If you exist in the eternal now, does it matter whether time moves or stands still? Clocks measure motion, not time. When motion stops, what remains to measure? A cesium atomic clock counts 9,192,631,770 vibrations of a cesium atom to define 1 second. Not because those vibrations are time itself, but because they're regular, predictable, shareable. Remove the vibration and the clock becomes meaningless. Remove all motion everywhere, and the concept of temporal measurement dissolves entirely. But here's the paradox that makes physicists pause. The fundamental equations of physics are time reversible. Newton's laws work equally well forward or backward. Maxwell's electromagnetic equations remain valid if you flip time's arrow. Even quantum mechanics, for all its probabilistic strangeness, treats past and future symmetrically in its basic formulations. The arrow of time, our sense that past is fixed and future open, emerges not from physics but from thermodynamics. Entropy tends to increase. Order tends toward disorder. Ice melts but never spontaneously freezes. Coffee mixes but never unmixes. This statistical tendency creates the psychological arrow pointing from organized past toward disorganized future. If time suddenly stopped, would entropy stop accumulating? Would the universe freeze in its current state of organization? Or would the very concept of stopping become meaningless without temporal flow to define what stopping means? General relativity offers another puzzle. Massive objects bend space-time, creating regions where time passes more slowly, relative to distant observers. Near a black hole's event horizon, time dilation becomes so extreme that a falling observer's watch appears to stop completely from an outside perspective. The observer experiences time normally, but the outside universe ages billions of years while they fall through what feels like minutes. What if time stopping is not a global phenomenon, but a local one? What if consciousness could create its own temporal reference frame, like matter creating gravitational time dilation? Perhaps meditation masters who report timeless experiences are not imagining. They're accessing consciousness states where temporal flow truly does pause. Quantum mechanics adds another layer of strangeness. At the Planck scale, 10 to the negative 43 seconds, time itself becomes uncertain, grainy, probabilistic. Some theories suggest that below this scale, time doesn't exist meaningfully at all. Reality might be fundamentally timeless, with temporal flow emerging only at larger scales through quantum decoherence and environmental interaction. Time is not a river you move along. You are the river. If this is true, then time stopping might be consciousness returning to its fundamental timeless nature. Not the end of time, but the recognition that time was always a construction, a useful fiction that helps navigate a reality that is actually eternal, changeless, perfect in its stillness. The deepest question becomes not what would happen if time stopped, but what makes you so certain it ever started. Between this heartbeat and the next, eternity waits. In that pause, all possibilities live simultaneously. Your heart beats roughly once per second when you're at rest, 72 times per minute, 100,000 times per day, 2.5 billion times in an average lifetime. Each beat creates a rhythm that your consciousness uses as a temporal anchor, a biological metronome that helps organize experience into the neat categories of before and after. But between each heartbeat lies a gap, not empty space, but pregnant pause, the diastolic moment when chambers refill, when pressure equalizes, when the heart rests before its next contraction. In that pause, blood flows according to pressure gradients established by the previous beat, yet the heart itself is momentarily still. Consciousness seems to work similarly. Between each thought lies a gap where no thought occurs. Between each sensory input and conscious recognition lies neural processing time, where awareness itself pauses, integrating signals into coherent experience. These gaps are not absences but presences, moments of pure awareness without content, consciousness without objects. What if time stopping would reveal these gaps that are always already there? What if the pause between heartbeats, between thoughts, between breaths is where time actually resides, not in the events themselves, but in the stillness that makes events possible? Ancient meditation traditions speak of entering the gap, finding the space between thoughts where time seems to disappear and awareness exists without temporal reference. Advanced practitioners report that this timeless awareness doesn't feel empty but supremely full, pregnant with infinite possibility, utterly complete without needing duration. Modern neuroscience has found something intriguing. The brain's default mode network, active during a rest and introspection, operates in rhythms that don't align with clock time. In deep meditation, this network shows patterns associated with timeless experience, as if consciousness can temporarily step outside the temporal flow it usually creates. The future is not ahead of us, it is unfolding through us. Perhaps the question is not what would happen if time stopped, but what is already happening in the eternal pause that exists between every moment you think you're experiencing. What if the flow of time is like a movie? Individual frames of eternal stillness projected so rapidly that consciousness creates the illusion of motion. Each heartbeat might be a single frame in the movie of existence, each thought a static image in the slideshow of awareness. The motion exists only in the projection, in consciousness threading stillness together into stories of duration. What if time never needed to stop because it was never moving in the first place? What holds you to Earth is not force but curvature. What would happen if space-time forgot how to bend? Einstein showed us that gravity is not objects pulling on each other across empty space, but mass bending the fabric of space-time itself. The Earth doesn't pull you down, it curves the space around it, so that falling becomes the straightest path you can take through curved geometry. This curvature is also what creates time's flow in gravitational fields. GPS satellites tick 38 microseconds per day faster than ground-based clocks, because they orbit in weaker gravity where space-time is less curved. Time literally runs at different rates depending on how deep you sit in gravity's well. If time stopped, would gravity stop working? Or would gravity continue bending space while the temporal dimension freezes, creating a universe where objects know which way to fall, but can never complete their falling? The mathematics becomes strange here. Einstein's field equations link the curvature of space-time to the distribution of mass and energy. In those equations, space and time are inseparable aspects of a single fabric. You can't stop time without stopping space, can't freeze duration without freezing distance. But quantum mechanics offers another possibility. At the deepest scales, space-time itself might be quantized, made of discrete units like pixels in a cosmic display. The Planck time of 10 to the minus 43 seconds might represent the universe's refresh rate, the smallest possible interval between one moment and the next. If time is quantized, then stopping might mean getting stuck between frames, trapped in the gap between one Planck moment and the next. Reality would become like a cosmic computer with a frozen processor, holding one frame of existence forever, while the potential for the next frame waits in quantum suspension. In such a state, would consciousness persist? Would you still be aware if awareness itself requires temporal flow to function? Or would frozen time reveal consciousness as something deeper than duration, a fundamental feature of reality that doesn't depend on change, motion, or the passage of moments? Time is not a river you move along. You are the river. Perhaps the most profound possibility is that time stopping would be indistinguishable from time continuing, because both descriptions apply to the same eternal reality. The flow and the stillness are two faces of something that transcends both motion and pause. What if the deepest physics is not about how time works, but about why we experience it at all? If time could stop, it would stop now, not in some distant future, but in this eternal present that never actually passes. Imagine the last second before time stops. What would it contain? Would you hear the final tick of every clock on Earth falling silent simultaneously? Would you feel the moment when change itself holds its breath? Would the last photon reach your eye before light forgets how to travel? But here's the paradox. If time stops, there can be no before or after the stopping. The concept of a final moment requires temporal flow to give it meaning. Without duration, the last second would not be last. It would be eternal, infinite, the only second that ever was or could be. This paradox points towards something deeper about the nature of now. The present moment is not a thin slice between past and future. It's the only thing that ever exists. Past exists only in present memory. Future exists only in present anticipation. What we call time's flow might be consciousness moving through aspects of an eternal now that contains everything simultaneously. Neuroscience confirms this in a strange way. Your brain doesn't experience the present moment directly. By the time sensory information reaches consciousness, it's already in the past. What you experience as now is actually a carefully constructed integration of recent past data, projected into the gap between perception and reality. The present moment you think you're living in is already memory by the time you become conscious of it. Your now is always slightly behind the actual now, like watching a live television broadcast that's actually delayed by a few seconds. If time stopped, would this delay disappear? Would consciousness finally catch up to the present moment it's always chasing? Or would the gap reveal itself as the space where consciousness actually resides, Not in time, but in the pause between temporal moments. The future is not ahead of us. It is unfolding through us. Medieval mystics spoke of entering the eternal now, a state of awareness where time's passage becomes irrelevant because everything meaningful exists in the spacious present. They describe this not as an absence of time, but as the fullness of time, the moment that contains all moments. Modern physics echoes this mysticism. If the block universe is real, then every moment exists eternally at its own space-time coordinates. The sensation of moving through time would be like reading a book. The story unfolds for you sequentially, but all pages exist simultaneously. Standing in the last second before time stops, you might discover that you've been standing there all along, that every moment of your life has been the same eternal moment, seen from different angles, experienced through different lenses of memory and expectation. What if time never needed to stop, because the only moment that ever existed was always this one? At the smallest scales of reality, time already stops and starts like a cosmic strobe light. Between each flash, eternity waits in quantum darkness. The Planck time, 5.4 times 10 to the negative 44th seconds, represents the shortest interval the universe can distinguish. Below this threshold, the very concept of before and after loses meaning. Quantum mechanics suggests that time itself might be grainy, pixelated, composed of discrete moments separated by gaps where duration has no definition. If this is true, then time doesn't flow smoothly, but jumps from one frame to the next like film through a projector. Between frames there is no time, only the potential for the next moment to crystallize out of quantum foam. In a very real sense, time is already stopping and starting billions of times per second, too rapidly for consciousness to detect the gaps. Quantum superposition allows particles to exist in multiple states simultaneously until observation collapses them into single definite configurations. Perhaps time itself exists in superposition, simultaneously flowing and stopped until consciousness observes it into one state or the other. This suggests that asking, "What if time stopped?" is really asking what would happen if consciousness stopped observing time into the flowing state and allowed it to collapse into the stopped state instead. The pause might already exist as quantum potential, waiting for the right kind of awareness to actualize it. Experiments in quantum mechanics have demonstrated that the future can influence the past through retrocausal effects. Information can flow backward through time in quantum systems. If consciousness operates through quantum processes in neural microtubules, as some theories suggest, then awareness might already exist partially outside linear time flow. What if meditation masters who report timeless experiences are not imagining, but accessing consciousness states where quantum temporal superposition becomes directly experienced? What if the mystical union with eternal now is actually a scientific phenomenon? Consciousness learning to exist in the gaps between Planck moments. Time is not a river you move along. You are the river. The double-slit experiment shows that particles behave differently when observed versus unobserved. Perhaps time behaves similarly, flowing when consciousness observes it as flowing, stopping when awareness releases its investment in temporal progression. Standing in a universe where time has stopped, you might discover that consciousness doesn't require duration to function. Awareness might be more fundamental than time, existing in the eternal gaps between moments, in the stillness that makes motion possible. If reality operates like quantum computation, then time-stopping might be like pausing a cosmic calculation while all possibilities exist simultaneously in quantum superposition. Not the end of process, but infinite potential waiting to be observed into actuality. What if the pause between moments is where consciousness actually lives? Memory is the only proof that time ever moved, but memory exists in the present, not the past. Every recollection you have, childhood summers, yesterday's conversation, the thought you had 3 seconds ago, exists as neural activity happening right now. The past lives in present brain states. Without memory, you would have no evidence that time flows at all. This creates a strange loop. You remember time passing, which convinces you that time flows, but the memory of temporal flow is itself a present moment phenomenon. You never actually experience the past, only present memories of what you believe was past. Neuroscience reveals that memory is not storage but reconstruction. Each time you remember something, your brain rebuilds the experience from fragments, filling in gaps with current context, expectations, emotions. The past you remember is partially created in the present moment of remembering. If time stopped, would memory stop forming? Or would consciousness discover that it never needed temporal flow to function, that awareness operates in an eternal present that can access any moment by shifting its focus rather than moving through duration? Some theories of consciousness propose that awareness exists in a state of pure presence that projects itself into temporal experience. Like a movie projector that remains stationary while images flow across its lens, consciousness might be the unchanging witness to changing phenomena rather than something that moves through time. This perspective suggests that time stopping would not trap consciousness in a single moment, but free it from the illusion that it was ever trapped by temporal flow. Without past and future to organize experience, awareness might discover its own timeless nature. Buddhist meditation speaks of bare attention, awareness without the mental commentary that usually interprets, categorizes, and time-stamps experience. Practitioners report that in this state, time seems to stop or become irrelevant. Not because duration ceases, but because consciousness recognizes its independence from temporal measurement. The future is not ahead of us, it is unfolding through us. What if memory is not evidence that time flows, but evidence that consciousness can focus its attention on any aspect of eternal existence? What if remembering the past and anticipating the future are simply ways awareness explores different regions of a timeless reality? Standing in stop time, you might discover that consciousness never needed duration to be conscious, never needed change to be aware, never needed flow to be present. The pause might reveal awareness as the constant background against which all temporal experience appears and disappears like waves on an ocean that is itself always still. If you are not moving through time, but time is moving through you, does it matter whether the movement continues or pauses? Light travels at 299,792,458 meters per second in vacuum. If time stops, does light become eternal sculpture hanging in space? Every photon reaching your eyes left its source at some point in the past. 8 minutes from the Sun, 4 years from Alpha Centauri, millions of years from distant galaxies. Light is time made visible, duration carved into electromagnetic radiation that carries the history of the universe to your retina. In a frozen moment, every photon would hang suspended between its source and destination, like luminous threads connecting past to present. The golden light streaming through your window would become a solid bridge linking you to the nuclear furnace at the sun's core. Starlight would crystallize into permanent pathways stretching across the galaxy. But here's where physics reveals its deepest strangeness. Light doesn't experience time. From a photon's perspective, traveling at the speed of light, its journey from source to destination is instantaneous. The 8-minute trip from Sun to Earth takes 0 time in the photon's reference frame. In some sense, light already exists outside temporal flow. This suggests that if time stopped, light might be unaffected because it was never really moving through time in the first place. Light exists in an eternal now that connects all points in space instantaneously. The delay we observe is a feature of our perspective, not the photon's experience. Maxwell's equations, which govern electromagnetic phenomena, are among the most time-symmetric in physics. They work equally well forward or backward in time. If time stopped, electromagnetic fields might continue to exist and even evolve according to their own laws, independent of the temporal framework that governs matter. Perhaps frozen light would reveal something profound about the nature of information. Every photon carries data, the wavelength encoding energy, polarization carrying information about its source. In stop time, this information might become accessible all at once, like having simultaneous access to every book in a library, instead of reading them sequentially. Time is not a river you move along. You are the river. Vision itself might be transformed in stop time. Currently, seeing requires temporal flow. Photons must travel from objects to eyes. Neural signals must move from retina to brain. Consciousness must integrate multiple exposures into coherent images. Without time's passage, this process couldn't complete. Yet perhaps consciousness would discover other forms of perception that don't depend on sequential information processing. Quantum entanglement allows instantaneous correlation across cosmic distances. Perhaps awareness could learn to perceive through quantum channels that transcend the speed of light limitation. Standing in frozen light, you might see the entire electromagnetic history of the universe simultaneously, every photon that ever was or could be, suspended in an eternal mandala of luminous information connecting every star to every eye that has ever wondered at. Their beauty. What if light is not traveling through space and time, but creating space and time through its eternal dance with consciousness? Sound is time made audible. In perfect stillness, what songs would silence sing? Every sound you hear is time carved into pressure waves, duration translated into acoustic vibration that reaches your ear as organized motion of air molecules. Music exists because time flows. Rhythm depends on temporal sequence. Melody requires notes to follow each other in time. Harmony emerges from simultaneous but distinct frequencies weaving together across moments. Sound travels at 343 meters per second through air at room temperature. Much slower than light, which means you always see events before you hear them. Lightning before thunder, distant explosions before their sonic signatures reach your ears. This delay creates a natural separation between visual and auditory experience of the same event. If time stopped, would sound waves freeze in place like solid sculptures of compressed air? Would music become visible architecture, melodies transformed into crystalline structures you could walk through, symphonies rendered as geometric patterns suspended in space? But here's the deeper question. Sound exists only through change, only through the temporal movement of pressure waves. Without duration, acoustic energy would have nowhere to propagate. The very concept of frequency, cycles per second, becomes meaningless when seconds stop accumulating. Yet perhaps something would remain. The pattern that was temporarily expressed as sound might persist in other forms. Information theorists tell us that data can be preserved across changes of substrate. The melody that exists as air pressure waves might survive as electromagnetic patterns, quantum correlations, arrangements of matter that preserve the organizational structure without requiring acoustic expression. Your hearing depends on temporal processing. Hair cells in your inner ear respond to vibration by converting mechanical motion into electrical signals. Those signals travel to your brain where they're interpreted as sound, music, speech. This entire process requires time to unfold: input, transmission, integration, recognition. In stop time, would hearing become something like telepathy? Would consciousness access sound information directly without the intermediary steps of wave propagation and neural processing? Perhaps awareness would discover that it was never really hearing acoustic waves, but interpreting patterns of information that temporarily took sonic form. The future is not ahead of us. It is unfolding through us. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. In the deepest quiet, you become aware of sounds you normally miss: your heartbeat, your breath, the subtle electrical hum of consciousness itself. Perhaps in stop time, this quiet listening would expand to encompass patterns of information that currently express themselves as sound but could be perceived directly. Ancient traditions speak of the sound of silence, not paradox but description of awareness, tuning into frequencies beyond acoustic range. Perhaps time stopping would reveal that consciousness has always been listening to something deeper than air pressure waves, something that sings in the quantum foam beneath space-time itself. What music plays in the eternal pause between one moment and the next? Matter wants to move, but something deeper wants to be still. If time stopped, which desire would win? Every atom in your body is in constant motion, electrons orbiting nuclei vibrating in molecular bonds, molecules tumbling through cellular space. Temperature itself is molecular motion. Heat is kinetic energy distributed among countless tiny dancers, moving faster than sound, faster than thought. At absolute zero, minus 273.15 degrees Celsius, molecular motion reaches its minimum. But even there, quantum mechanics insists that complete stillness is impossible. Zero-point energy keeps particles jittering with irreducible quantum motion. The universe seems allergic to perfect rest. If time stopped, would this quantum motion continue? Would atoms keep vibrating outside of time, creating motion without duration, energy without temporal flow? Or would quantum motion freeze as well, revealing matter in its deepest possible stillness, not just cold, but temporally inert? The second law of thermodynamics tells us that entropy tends to increase, order tends toward disorder, energy spreads from concentrated to distributed states, temperatures equalize across gradients. This entropic tendency creates time's arrow, the direction from organized past toward disorganized future. But if time stopped, entropy couldn't increase because increase requires temporal sequence. The universe would be frozen in its current state of organization. Coffee would never finish mixing with cream. Ice would never complete its melting. Hot objects would never finish cooling down. Yet the frozen state might reveal something beautiful about the nature of organization itself. Every snowflake, every crystal, every complex molecule exists as a temporary island of order in the sea of increasing entropy. Stopping time might preserve these islands forever, making permanent the intricate patterns that are usually dissolved by thermal motion and chemical change. Time is not a river you move along. You are the river. Standing in matter's perfect stillness, you might discover that motion was always an illusion created by consciousness, moving its attention between different aspects of static structure. The atoms in your body never needed to vibrate to be atoms. Vibration is how we measure their existence across time, not what existence means outside temporal reference. Perhaps the deepest rest is not the absence of motion, but the recognition that motion and stillness are descriptions we apply to something that transcends both. Matter might be neither moving nor still, but something prior to either category, pure potential waiting to be observed into whatever state consciousness chooses to see. What if the weight of stillness is not heaviness, but infinite lightness, the freedom that comes from recognizing that you never needed to move through time, because time was always moving through you? Are you aware of being aware right now? That awareness doesn't need time to know itself. Consciousness is the universe's strangest phenomenon, the way matter learns to experience itself from the inside. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others in networks so complex that mapping them fully might require computational power exceeding the capacity of all current supercomputers combined. Yet somehow, from this biological complexity emerges something simple, the raw fact of being conscious, of experiencing rather than merely processing information. And this experiencing seems to require no time at all. Consider the moment of recognition, when you suddenly understand a concept, recognize a face, or grasp the solution to a problem. The aha moment seems instantaneous, outside temporal flow. One instant you don't know, the next you do. But between unknowing and knowing lies a gap, where understanding crystallizes without requiring duration. If time stopped, would consciousness stop as well? Or would it discover that awareness never depended on temporal flow, but only on the capacity for information to recognize its own patterns? Perhaps consciousness exists in the eternal present that lies beneath the stream of changing thoughts and sensations. Meditation traditions describe states of pure awareness, consciousness without content, knowing without objects, presence without the mental commentary that usually creates temporal experience. Practitioners report that these states don't feel empty but supremely full, complete without needing past or future for reference. Brain imaging shows that during deep meditation, activity in the default mode network, the brain circuits associated with self-referential thinking and temporal reasoning dramatically decreases. It's as if consciousness temporarily steps outside the neural machinery that creates the experience of selfhood and time's passage. The future is not ahead of us. It is unfolding through us. What if consciousness is not produced by neural activity but focused by it? Like sunlight passed through a lens, Awareness might be concentrated and directed by brain activity but not created by it. In this view, stopping time would not eliminate consciousness, but reveal its independence from temporal processes. Quantum theories of consciousness suggest that awareness might operate through mechanisms that transcend classical physics. If consciousness involves quantum coherence in neural microtubules, it might exist partially outside normal space-time constraints, experiencing past and future as equally present, equally accessible. Perhaps the deepest discovery would be that consciousness never needed time to be conscious, never needed change to be aware, never needed temporal flow to recognize its own nature. The pause might reveal awareness as the eternal background against which all temporal experience appears and disappears. What would you discover about yourself if time stopped and you were still there to discover it? If time stops, when does the stopping end? The question contains its own answer. Never, because when requires time to give it meaning. This paradox reveals something profound about the nature of endings. Every conclusion you've ever experienced, the end of a song, the completion of a thought, the final breath, required temporal flow to be meaningful. Endings exist only in time, defined by the sequence from before to after. Without time, nothing can end because nothing can begin. The stopped universe would exist in eternal completion, not finished, but beyond the need for finishing. Not concluded, but prior to the concept of conclusion. Consider what this means for consciousness. If awareness persists in stopped time, it would exist without anticipation of future states, without memory of past states, without the psychological narrative that usually defines personal identity. Pure presence without the story of someone being present. This might be the deepest form of meditation imaginable, awareness so complete that it needs no duration to be fulfilled, no progression to be satisfied, no change to be perfect. The eternal pause might reveal consciousness in its most fundamental form, the capacity for experiencing that doesn't depend on there being anything to experience. But the paradox has another face. If time can stop, it can also restart. What would cause the resumption of temporal flow? Perhaps consciousness itself, bored with perfection, would choose to dream time back into existence. The universe might be caught in an eternal cycle, time flowing until consciousness discovers timelessness, then restarting when awareness chooses to explore duration again. Eastern philosophy speaks of cosmic cycles, periods of manifestation followed by periods of withdrawal, creation followed by dissolution, time followed by timelessness. Perhaps the question is not what would happen if time stopped, but what happens in the gaps between cosmic cycles when the universe rests in its own eternal nature. Time is not a river you move along. You are the river. The most profound possibility is that time stopping would reveal it never needed to start. What we call temporal flow might be consciousness exploring different aspects of eternal reality, like walking through a gallery where all paintings exist simultaneously, but can only be viewed one at a time. If endings require time and time can stop, then perhaps the deepest reality is beginningless, endless, eternally complete. Not perfect, because it achieved completion through process, but perfect because completion was always its nature. Standing at the end that never comes, you might realize that you've been standing there all along, that every moment of your life has been the same eternal moment of consciousness, recognizing its own timeless nature through temporary temporal experience. What if the end of time is also its beginning, the pause that makes all flow possible? You never left the present moment. Time stopping would only help you notice that you were always here. At the end of this impossible journey into temporal pause, what do you find? Not a frozen wasteland where clocks have died and motion has surrendered to stillness. You find the same eternal now that was always present beneath the surface of every second you thought was passing. The exploration of stopped time reveals that time never needed to flow for consciousness to be conscious, for awareness to be aware, for existence to be meaningful. What we call temporal flow might be consciousness exploring different aspects of eternal reality, like a beam of light scanning across a landscape that exists completely in every moment. Physics cannot tell us what time is, only how it behaves under various conditions. Relativity shows it can slow, speed up, dilate, contract. Quantum mechanics suggests it might be granular, uncertain, emergent. But no equation explains why temporal experience exists at all, why consciousness finds itself apparently moving through moments that seem to flow. Perhaps the answer is that consciousness doesn't move through time. Time moves through consciousness. Awareness is the still point around which all change revolves, the eternal witness to temporal transformation, the unchanging background that makes all change detectable. If time stopped, this still point would remain because it was never moving. What would end is not consciousness, but the illusion that consciousness was ever separate from the eternal present, in which all existence unfolds. Standing in the stopped universe, you might realize that you've been standing there always, that every moment of your life has been the same moment of awareness, recognizing its own nature through different temporal perspectives, past and future revealed as mental constructions, useful for navigation but not ultimate realities. The future is not ahead of us. It is unfolding through us. This recognition doesn't diminish the beauty of temporal experience, but reveals its deeper purpose. The flow of time might be consciousness's way of exploring its own infinite creativity, like a composer playing variations on an eternal theme. Each moment a note in a symphony that exists completely outside time, but can only be appreciated through temporal unfoldment. The return to now is the recognition that you never left. Time stopping would not trap you in a single moment, but free you from the illusion that you were ever trapped by temporal succession. The pause between moments might be where consciousness actually resides, not in time, but in the awareness that makes all temporal experience possible. You are not in the universe having a temporal experience. You are the universe having an eternal experience of itself through the temporary lens of human consciousness. Time flows through you like water through a stream bed that remains constant while the water passes. What if the deepest truth is the simplest? Consciousness is the eternal now, and time is its dream of movement, change, and becoming. If this journey into impossible pause brought you peace, if it helped you recognize the eternal present beneath time's apparent flow, share it with someone who needs to remember that they are not racing against time. Time is dancing through them. Rest well in the timeless awareness that you are,